Well, hey there, everybody. This is Cassandra from CassandraTyndall.com, and I'm joined here today with my wonderful friend, Gray Crawford from Olympia, Washington. How are you, Gray?
I'm doing good. How's it in the down under right now?
Down under, yes. I'm catching up with you from the other side of the Pacific Ocean. Last time we connected was in real life in Seattle, which was amazing, and that was on the back of our NORWAC trip. So how are you post-conference, Gray?
I'm recovered now. We're up here. It's just the summer, so I know right there you're like beginning of winter.
Correct, yeah.
But just kind of getting into the summer of everything. My oldest daughter just graduated high school, so that's a big deal. It's just happened.
Yeah, it's definitely the summer break time in the
Yeah,
US. We don't really have our big sort of summer break phase until January. So we're in the trenches down here in very cold Brisbane. I'm only joking there. It's not a very cold place at all. So anyway, I just had this idea during the week when Gray and I were chatting online. Hey, let's do a video and talk a little bit about the eclipses and potentially some of the astrology of July. So we wanted to just kind of maybe demystify a few of the misconceptions or confusion around eclipses, and also give you some practical tips and tricks for navigating the season. So yeah, I was just thinking, Gray, how long have we known each other for? I think we first met through Chris Brennan, right? Maybe like 2015, 2016.
yeah. I want to say it was 2016 that we started communicating with each other. But
Yeah, yeah.
maybe at the end of 2015, just through being in the Hellenistic. Yeah, we were both in the Hellenistic astrology course, so just kind of saw each other, I think, through interacting on that.
Yeah. Then we met for the first time at UAC last year, and then we've reconnected
Hmm.
on my recent trip to the US and spent some time with you and your lovely partner, June. And yeah, so it's wonderful to be able to kind of do this work with friends and chat about the things that we love. So big thank you to Chris for, I guess, inadvertently connecting us. So firstly, we're into this new eclipse season, which I guess, technically speaking, kind of started around the solstice. So we have two eclipse seasons a year, and they sort of, technically speaking, start when the sun gets to around 18 degrees either side of the nodes. And so, well, what are we now? Very end of June. So next week, July 2 for you in the Northern Hemisphere. For myself, south of the equator, it'll be July 3. And we have our first eclipse of this new season. So one of the things that makes this season a little bit different to our previous eclipse season back in January is this is the first eclipse season where the eclipses actually occur all in the Cancer and Capricorn axis. The last season in January, it was like that crossover season where we were still having eclipses in Leo and Aquarius and getting that introductory phase of the Cancer Capricorn. So this upcoming eclipse is the new moon, or the solar eclipse, occurring at 11 degrees of Cancer. So that, just to give you the data on that before we start breaking it down, here in the south will be July 3 at around 5:15 a.m. And on the eastern time zone in the US, it will be 3:15 p.m. on July 2, and that would be just after midday on the Pacific, on the east, the western side for you guys. Is that right, Gray?
Yeah, like 12:15 or so.
Mm-hmm.
If it's in Pacific, yeah.
So what are some of your thoughts on the eclipse, Gray? We've got so many thoughts, but I just thought I would, get your ideas first and foremost. What are your thoughts around this one?
Well, I mean, it is in range of it being a total solar eclipse. So that's one just really big factor. So it's being a total solar eclipse, which I think the sun is what, like 7 degrees or so away from the node, something like that.
Yeah, so I've
on
just
it.
popped green up there. Yeah, so it is 7 degrees from the North Node. So that technically does make it a total solar eclipse. So, which is only really visible in the South Americas. It's not a
Yeah.
very visible eclipse. I'll just change that location so we can also get a feel for how it will be in the Northern Hemisphere. So,
Yeah, I think it's like Chile and Argentina, I think are the places especially it's going to be visible. So those places, yeah, where the actual total, I mean, where you actually get the black sun being completely blackened would be the most potent impact. But because it still is a total solar eclipse, which means we do have the phenomenon of the moon, you know, completely covering the sun. And, you know, it's like if it was visible here, we'd have bright daylight, and then we'd have this time of total complete darkness with the moon completely covering the sun. So that in and of itself makes it a more intensified feeling of the eclipse for everybody, not just people in South America. One of the other factors is that this is the first total solar eclipse in Cancer on the North Node side. And we've been having such a major activity going on the South Node side. We had the previous solar eclipses in Capricorn, and then we've been having this Saturn-Pluto conjunction that's, well, they've been really close, pretty much conjunct. They haven't gone to the exact conjunction yet, but they've been very close in range at the same place as the South Node of the moon for months now. And that's really been dominating a lot of people's narratives of what's been happening. So now we get a total solar eclipse setting off the Cancer end of it. So that being on the North Node, it's going to most likely bring in a lot of opportunities for new things in a way, a little bit more focus on like a kind of like a flooding in a way of new things coming. There still will be things going out of people's lives for sure. Eclipses usually have things leaving your life, things coming into your life, but the actual total solar eclipse happening on the North Node does kind of make a little bit more of like a surge of things coming in.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Gray, with your point around how, you know, this year, 2019, has been so much focus around what's happening in Capricorn with the Saturn, Pluto, and South Node. And I guess just to sort of emphasize that point is that just post-eclipse is when the Saturn and the South Node perfect their conjunction again. So this is the first real push, or the first real kind of opening that we have in the Cancer part of our charts since the nodes entered Cancer back in November of 2018. And so some people might be kind of thinking, oh, but I'm not a Cancer, so it doesn't mean anything for me. And that's actually not true, because we all have a house or a specific life topics in our birth charts that are ruled by Cancer. And then, of course, we all have the moon in our charts in a sign somewhere in our house. So not only is it the house topics that are being illuminated or emphasized right now, it's also the bigger picture perhaps around your own lunar story or your own moon stuff in your birth chart. And of course, the moon is, you know, we could talk about this for, you know, till Christmas time, but, you know, definitely can bring up themes to do with security. That's, you know, not only in the sort of physical realm, but also the emotional realm, and really emphasize, you know, the Cancer story, the nurturing, the protectiveness, and the things that we need. I remember astrologer Frank Clifford. He once, something I listened to on him recently, maybe it was at NORWAC, I can't remember, but he sort of described the moon being a little bit like the little backpack of needs that you're carrying around with you through life. And right now, the moon and the sign of Cancer, which is the sign that the Cancer or the moon finds its home in. So this has been like hugely emphasized right now. So it's really about like what we need. And it may not just be about paying the bills or crossing the I's, or dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but it's also like what we need from perhaps at that more emotional standpoint, or what we really need to feel that sense of belonging or family, or that clan component that Cancer is very indicative of as well. What are your thoughts around that part, Gray?
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. I mean, in any solar eclipse like this, particularly when we got a total solar eclipse, and again, the moon is, completely blackening the sun. So it's sort of like the great light of the great light, which we can think about the light of consciousness getting overcome by darkness. And so we typically think of what was hidden becoming revealed during eclipses. We typically think about things becoming a little bit more irrational, sort of like a weird energy vortex, things a little bit more out of control, just in a sense that a lot of times big pivotal life events just kind of come through when we enter eclipses. And it's not really the kind of thing that you're like, oh, I'm going to elect this moment to like start this new thing. Eclipses just seem to often line up with people's life stories, where all these intersections of their narrative and story just all reach this peak, and big changes just seem to kind of flow in pretty naturally when we have eclipses. But because this is in Cancer, and typically we have a solar eclipse and maybe some other planet is ruling the eclipse, so we're kind of looking at that as giving us some extra guidance. In this case, the moon rules Cancer, so the ruler of the eclipse is actually the body that's eclipsing the sun at the same time. So being in Cancer, also a water sign, it is going to make it more emotional, maybe feeling like more irrational in a way. But I would definitely invite people to take some time to really sit and reflect about what does come up. Because like what you were saying about not just like your normal like paying the bills and that type of thing, like what you normally feel you're supposed to do. When we think about Capricorn, and particularly when we got Saturn and Pluto conjoining in Capricorn, where the south node of the moon is at the same time, that definitely has a lot to say about culture, civilization, how we get conditioned, how we feel like we need to do things to be successful, or how we're supposed to act within whatever sort of system or dominant cultural field that we're in. So I do think the things that could kind of come up that might go against that are things to really consider. You might be getting some important kind of inner insight and feelings that might help you, just get some ideas for some new growth opportunities, things you maybe just hadn't considered before, because you normally are worrying about, dotting that I or whatever, paying that bill or whatever it is.
Yeah, 100%. I think too, like when you think about what's actually happening in the sky, is that the sun, which is the primary yang or active force in the sky, is getting eclipsed by the body that represents, the emotions, the instinct, and is one of the more passive or instinctive or feminine kind of energies. And that's getting we've still got the yang as kind of being overshadowed by the yin. And so, and as you said, it's the ruler of the eclipse is the eclipsing body of itself. And so what I think is coming up is a lot of, trusting those instincts, trusting those spidey senses perhaps, or even though it might kind of defy your logic or what you would normally do, it's about really tapping into the emotions, the feelings, or feeling it in your waters, so to speak, even if it does defy or conflict with some of the more logical or rational components of what might normally be your mojo type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that sort of brings up the idea of darkness and light, and eclipses are obviously black, so they obviously go with darkness, and it's definitely that symbol of the fertile fertile dark void, that sort of matrix, that it's actually that darkness, that place of nothingness that actually is this, actually ultimately gives birth to light and creation and that sort of thing. And I think that side of it is because it is on the north node of the moon, and it's a total solar eclipse, and it's at odds with this really heavy Saturn-Pluto thing, which has been stirring up so much anxiety with people. And the current events are really intense right now. There's so many examples in the United States where I live, which are pretty insane examples of manifestations of Saturn Pluto going on right now, causing a lot of people to be very upset on many different levels, many things intersecting of sort of systematic oppression and suffering. But I think it's not like, I just think there is, because this eclipse is happening on the north node of the moon, and then when we get to the lunar eclipse that's following it, the lunar eclipse is tied in with Saturn and Pluto. Something we can eventually talk about is Saturn and Pluto just happen to also be on their own south nodes of their moon, which, their own south nodes. Saturn's conjunct its south node, Pluto's conjunct its south node, the moon is going to be conjunct its south node. So it's not just the moon's going to be eclipsed, Saturn, Pluto itself will be eclipsed, and the lunar eclipse coming up. So I do think a lot of these Saturn-Pluto themes are going to get intensified, but I do think there's going to be something coming through with this too that can help people start liberating a sense of how to start taking ownership of their lives and how they're responding to this, and what to go forward, like these next 6 months with their life and what they want to actually create.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there on that sort of point where all the Saturn South Node and the Pluto too stuff, it's really it's such a heaviness to that energy that there's no real possibility anymore of burying your head in the sand or ostriching kind of certain topics in your life. And I think, everybody has their own kind of philosophy or exposure or beliefs around kind of what karma is. But I think these eclipses can also bring awareness to those intuitive feelings that perhaps are a thing, but you might be ignoring. So, you might have problems with a certain aspect in your life, but you're burying your head in work or what have you. These eclipses are coming along and kind of really going to spotlight those things that are not able to be in denial about anymore. And so even though we've got this solar eclipse in Cancer on the North Node, it does sort of potentially suggest when I see North Node eclipses like this, I kind of describe them a little bit like Dorothy, especially when we had the Great American Eclipse in Leo back in 2017, because it had this sort of, golden promise of sunshine and that type of thing, symbolically. And it's a little bit like Dorothy clicking her heels 3 times and following the yellow brick road. And I think that North Node is very suggestive of that. It's about, following the possibility of something, even if you don't know the outcome of it. But the heaviness of the Saturn and the Pluto and the South Node, it's been such a prominent feature. And I think maybe the challenge or the push here is to trust in that thing that maybe seems a little bit whimsical, or trust in that thing that seems like almost like it's too good, or it's, and there is the habit breaking, in order to push into the next thing, you've got to close a door on something else. Then potentially the lunar eclipse, which perfects, I think, in the Northern Hemisphere on the 16th of July, and then for us in Australia on the 17th, it's, really going to spotlight and shine that light on that stuff that's very heavy, that might be very dark. And there's a lot of like release and letting go sort of language used around this. But when you think about the full moon coming up to the eclipse, there may be some release and let go of it too, but there's also this sense of things coming into fulfillment or into fruition or to a fullness or a ripening as well. So it might also be bringing a huge awareness to what responsibilities perhaps you want to release or let go of, or obligations you're no longer going to stand for. So there's real clarity, reprioritization of boundaries and things like that. So I think that's where the ripening or the fruition of things can come through, because when you realize what you're prepared to be responsible for, what you're prepared to commit or obligate yourself to, then you can kind of take that leap of faith. It's almost like the symbology or the symbolism is a little bit reversed this month. It's almost like you've got to take a leap forward and say yes, and then maybe like figure out the other stuff later, but knowing that that other stuff has to get figured out, or the door is going to close on something, but you don't necessarily need to close it first. And I think since the eclipses in January, we have been in this kind of ready to, I mean, we did the whole Marie Kondoing thing, right? So people were just like releasing and letting go of all this stuff, but there's been nothing to kind of refill that energy. And so the North Node in Cancer and the eclipse this week is perhaps helping us to really work out what security means to us, what belonging means to us, what family or friendships and connections, who are my clan, who are my people. And I feel that it's sort of like more about that than perhaps, the Capricorn stuff, which might be achieving those external boxes out in the world.
Yeah, definitely. It makes me think too, like you were mentioning, when we went into the eclipse, that zone of like the 18 degrees or so, it was basically the solstice, which, for us are different. Y'all just went into the winter solstice down there, and us up here just went into the summer solstice. And we do in astrology take a dominant northern hemisphere perspective, where Cancer is associated, northern hemisphere perspective, with summer and the height of the sun, right? And it's the first house of the Thema Mundi. It's ruled by the moon. So it's this place of like life and growth, right? Like the exaltation of Jupiter as well. Whereas we do think of Capricorn up here as the winter, even though for y'all down there, it's your summer solstice, but we associate with Saturn and Mars exalted and all that. So there is this emphasis there of like, this kind of place of death in a way, but a death that's like, clearing the ground for this this rebirth and something new coming in. And I do think that this eclipse, the total solar eclipse being on Cancer, is ultimately, kind of like you're saying, it is giving a spark of, well, maybe it's not a spark, might be the wrong word, but you're kind of getting pulled into this dark void of this fertile void that is giving you a sense of coming out of that and through this eclipse vortex of, I think, what do you, what is important to you to protect and nurture? How do you need to reconfigure elements of your life to really focus on what you do really want to cultivate and grow? Some of the stuff you were saying too is making me think of Bernadette Brady's work, who brought in a lot of the stuff about the Saros series and what eclipse families they belong to. And this solar eclipse is part of 3 North, which she describes as being this sort of like over excessive eclipse family, where like some sort of like new information or something kind of comes in that can really transform whatever your circumstances is. And there might be this kind of push to undertake some kind of big project or big idea, but she kind of has a warning about, that it could be really positive, like a positive growth thing, but just be careful of not getting, carried away with it at the same time.
Yeah.
And because it's in a cardinal sign, being in a cardinal, these are cardinal total solar eclipse. In contrast to that total Leo eclipse, this is going to be much more like fast, immediate, like this eclipse hits and stuff is just happening. People are kind of going into this eclipse with kind of being, some people literally being on the move, moving, new things coming in. And so I think there is an element of that really needs to get navigated. And you're right that at the same time, the super heavy Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn, I mean, I guess you could be putting your head in the sand at this point, but I mean, yes, you're right. Collective events as well as astrology transits, it's like you really need to face what is going on in the world right now, and you really have to take a stand on what you believe in and taking, responsibility for what you want to bring into the world and create.
Yeah, totally. I think it's also about, what you're willing to stand for and what is right or perhaps what is wrong. And thinking too, like that the solar eclipse is in Cancer, where Jupiter finds its exaltation. So I think there's also that point, I think you touched on it earlier, where, I think beliefs are a part of that. And one thing where people do get very, feisty about or protective of are the things that they believe. So for sure. And so, yeah, you were mentioning that, being a cardinal, events around the eclipse can sort of happen really quite quickly. I know astrologers do tend to have varying ideas around how long the eclipse season sort of lasts for. And generally speaking, an eclipse season, according to Bernadette Brady's research, it's when the sun gets approximately 18 degrees within the node, within the node. So that sort of started around the solstice, and it will complete around the 5th of August. So that is kind of like 18 to 19 days around either side of the node. And so I think we were talking about how when the sun sort of officially exits that range or that orb, then the eclipse season is kind of over. And that's also going to be the same degree, around 4 degrees of Leo, which Mercury will then station on as a part of its retrograde. That happens just sort of as the eclipse is happening at the same time. So this sort of leads me to think, when we think about the meaning of the Saros series, about new information and being excessive, that, Mercury going backwards throughout this eclipse season is also kind of highlighting that while that there's a push forward, there's an opening, and the cardinality of Cancer sort of might want to really kind of like get its nippers on it, so to speak, and really grasp at these new opportunities. There might be some delays or snafus, or more information has to come through. So I feel that it's kind of like a double whammy. It could be this real cardinal push forward, but then with Mercury's movements as well, because Mercury will start its retrograde in Leo and then move back into Cancer. There might be, like a fast completion of events as that eclipse season finishes. And so I think that is around the 4th of, what did I say before we were talking about it? I think it was around...
I think it's actually more like July 27th, July 28th.
Oh, yes, it was. Yes, you're right. July 27 and 8 was when that node gets out of range there. So that kind of may be when you start to really feel some potential events start to speed up or start to reveal themselves as well. Because as we know, a lot of the times eclipse events, don't happen at the time of the eclipse. They kind of happen often within the season. So, how do you generally delineate eclipses in that respect? Do you kind of keep it like, okay, the sun is out of that nodal range, it's over, and we're not getting it again until the next season, which in this case will be in December? What are your thoughts on that, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that perspective of the 18-degree rule as being a way to put some form and structure on the experience of the eclipse. And I think it's a good idea. I guess I take a much more kind of broad look at it, though. I feel like lots of events, I mean, sometimes there is something just comes out of the blue and you get a specific event really comes in strong during an eclipse. And yes, often in between the eclipses, and especially, and within that 18-degree window that you're talking about too. There's also that six, at least a six, and I guess being a cardinal, they're not going to probably be as long lasting theoretically in the impact as like the Leo eclipses or the fixed sign eclipses. But I do see them as being like this kind of larger sort of narrative that's kind of coming in with the eclipses. And so it's really kind of shaping this whole next 6 month, really the next eclipse comes in basically on the solstice, right after the solstice. There's going to be one like on the northern hemisphere Christmas time for those that
Christmas
celebrate
Day, yeah.
Those that celebrate Christmas, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I do see that as being sort of like an overarching trajectory of kind of, but yeah, I look at it more as in the I see the in between the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse being especially potent, and then especially the week or so leading into the solar eclipse as also. But a lot of times, I mean, honestly, what you'll see is there's already something kind of being set in motion before we even get to this point. And it's kind of really building, and we kind of come into the eclipses, and it just like really comes into form right then. But sometimes, yeah, also it's like that out of the unexpected thing, something you tend to lose things that you weren't sure, and it often is right as you come into the eclipses, like you're saying, that same period where you start realizing that leading into the eclipse, like something's leaving your life, you have to let go of something, and then often things start coming into your life at the same time. That period at the end of July, though, is really interesting because combined with the Mercury retrograde, which we should talk a little bit about more, but it's basically at the end of July that Mercury is coming out of the beams of the sun. It's still going to be retrograde, but it's at the end of July that Mercury becomes visible again as a morning star, which is a really big moment for Mercury, where Mercury's really making this major announcement. And so that is basically happening at the same time that the sun leaves that 18-degree range and it's kind of going into Leo, and then Mercury's also stationing direct at the same time. But yeah, so there is going to be a big shift then at the end.
Yeah, agreed.
You're right that there might be another like thing coming in.
Yeah, just when you sort of think it's over, it's like Mercury might be, oh, I've got some news for you, and it's kind of not done with yet. So, yeah, and the fact that Mercury is rising as a morning star as well kind of gives it a little bit more, perhaps, independence, or, maybe a little bit more of a renegade or wanting to go its own way. Stars that are oriental do tend to operate in a little bit more of a solo or an independent or a I'm doing things my own way, as opposed to the occidental stars, which tend to be a little bit more dependent on other people, or a little bit more responsive or reactive as well. So, Mercury is definitely going to have some words, I think, as a part of this eclipse cycle. So, and again, like each eclipse is, its own beast in a sense. And so, back to the idea of when does this season start and when does it end? I mean, I think, for me, I kind of like to keep things a little bit sort of crisper where I can. And so I feel that the range of using the 18-degree orb with the sun does tend to give us, some kind of boundary to work with here. But I think that, with this Mercury component, there's definitely kind of perhaps some lingering or effects or things that might kind of we've got these eclipses sort of happening almost, within kind of range of Mercury's movements as well. So there's that kind of factor to consider. So perhaps the wild card element that eclipses can bring may be a little bit more emphasized then. And time, I often describe those time, like the eclipse portal is a little bit, especially the time in between the two eclipses of the season. It's almost like that week between Christmas and New Year where you don't know, well, that's how it is in Australia because it's our prime holiday season, but you don't know what day of the week it is, you don't know what you're meant to be doing, and everything just feels different, like your regular rhythms and your regular kind of routine is really out of whack. And so eclipses kind of can feel like that as well, even if you're still doing the general kind of, mojo of your life. There's a different feel, or there's a different, almost like, I wouldn't go so far as to say impending doom, but there's this sense of there's this sense of anticipation, this sense of something's changing, something's shifting, and something is sort of going to be revealed to me. And I kind of like the eeriness, and I think that's probably a better way to describe it as opposed to impending doom, although some astrologers might like that term, and I'm not like totally averse to it, but there is this eerie feeling, this eerie sense of change. But of course that can often be, if the eclipse is visible in where you're living, then that can also be more of a physical phenomenon as well. But given that it's sort of occurring, down in the south of the Pacific Ocean and across a few of the Southern American countries, that it will be interesting to see if anything kind of manifests in that part of the world. But time definitely feels different. And it's definitely kind of like a watch and wait with eclipses. And I guess it is a Cancer eclipse after all. And, being a Cancer, and we all always like to look back, as they say. So I guess some ways to kind of think about the eclipse season that we're now in, and it's kind of happening, is the last time we had Cancer Capricorn eclipses was the last time the nodes were in this part of the sky was in between August of 2009 and March of 2011, except the nodes were reversed at that time. So the north node of the moon was in Capricorn and the south was in Cancer. Now, the time before that was when we had the north node in Cancer and the south node in Capricorn, so the repetition of what we have currently. And that was in April of 2000 and through to October 2001. So there's definitely that date range is, very memorable. Whenever we talk about 2001, the events of, that year definitely sort of changed the world, at least in the West. And of course, in the East as well, it really changed our outlook on things and, the way we view security, the way that we view our home and our clan and who belongs and who doesn't and all those sorts of things. So, and we are kind of having a little bit of a repeat of that as well in the current sort of climate. So,
I mean, it was also the Saturn-Pluto opposition then.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got, a sort of like this double up in a way of theme this time. And then when we had the last eclipses, when the north node was in Capricorn, Pluto had not long ingressed into Capricorn at that time. So, I mean, just some dates there just to perhaps, trigger your own memories. Oh, this is what happened to me back in those years, because one of the ways we predict the future is to look at the past. And so they were the last two times we had eclipses in the current signs that they're in right now. Yeah.
I think going back to that one thing you were saying too, to think about both sides of, whatever chart you have, you want to be thinking about, what's your Capricorn house of your chart, what's the Cancer house of your chart, and those themes of those houses. Especially also, particularly the angular signs too, like if you have stuff in Aries or Pluto. You know, us represent the Pluto Libra generation. This is a big eclipse for us. In particular, the people that are like those Saturn, Pluto and Libra people in the early 80s, who are getting Saturn, Pluto square their natal Saturn, Pluto with the eclipse at the same time. But if you have any planets in Aries, Libra also, it's definitely something to think about. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I've had the experience before where I kind of going into the eclipse, I already know I'm in the middle, I'm already in the midst of something that I've lost, and I already know that I'm in this place of needing to empty and make space. But I think that's one thing we maybe haven't mentioned so far. Generally, that's a good idea going into a total solar eclipse. It's just this idea of emptying, letting yourself be open, because it does tend to bring in an influx at the same time, things leaving your life, things entering. And as you mentioned, I agree that the most intense period is always between the two eclipses. So that period from the first week of July up until the week of July 16th and July 16th, July 17th is going to be especially intense. And because at the same time, you know, we get the solar eclipse on July 2nd, Mercury is stationing. So Mercury is barely even moving that whole time. And then Mars comes into Leo. Mars basically catches up to Mercury and actually exactly conjoins it on July 8th, the day after Mercury stations. And at the same time, they're squaring Uranus and Taurus. So that definitely speaks to some kind of major, I mean, it just really amplifies the quality of something unexpected, something new coming in, thinking about something in a different way. And then at the same time, Mercury retrograde doubles down on the idea of emptying, of purging, of releasing things, of releasing old habitual patterns, doing something different, making space for something new to come into your life. So it's just a really amplified feeling of those things.
Yeah, for sure. So we've kind of got this like cardinal push with the eclipses, then converse these squaring off with planets in Leo and, you know, Uranus and Taurus. So it's kind of like this sort of desire to maybe want to really push through something quite quickly versus this, I find when planets are in square, it's sort of like they're getting in each other's way, like a T intersection. You know, one planet wants to go one way and another wants to go another. So, you know, Mercury and Mars is sort of, it's kind of like joining forces in a way and, you know, wanting to kind of take on Uranus. So it might be sort of, your thoughts and your ideas, Mercury, versus the action that you're taking, Mars. And it's like, well, are my thoughts and actions actually aligning with the changes that I want to bring in? Or, you know, is my walk matching my talk, so to thing, or talk matching the walk, however you want to, riff on that. And the Uranus coming along and sort of, that dose of authenticity, that dose of, doing things differently and, challenging that. So, and the eclipse might just be that little bit of a nitro boost or that kind of surge of energy that's like, okay, well, I really don't know how I'm going to do things differently. I really don't know what I'm, moving towards or through or for, but I know it's just got to be different than how it has been.
Yeah, it makes me think of something we were going to talk about, we haven't mentioned yet, is Neptune and Pisces. And I believe your talk at NORAC was waving, not crashing. So you may have some, that was the title, right?
Yeah, I actually...
You might have some insights for us on that.
I officially called it waving, not drowning. But then
waving, not drowning.
And then I was sort of reading some stuff from the Picatrix, and there's a quote in there from Agrippa that says something along the lines of standing, not falling. So I
Yeah.
kind of changed the terminology, but I didn't bother doing it officially because I thought Laura, the person that runs the conference, I'm like, I'm not going to like burden her with changing stationery at the last minute. But yeah, I think so that was my Norwalk talk. So it was about that kind of concept of sometimes we can get tripped up on things, or we can sort of stumble a little bit. Sometimes we even fall, but the idea is to get back up again. So, the eclipse does, it is in range of trining, I guess, the Neptune. Is that where you were going with that, Gray? Or
Yeah, because it's eclipses are always in this particular eclipses are very intense oppositions where you have like Saturn, Pluto on the south node, total solar eclipse on the north node. And then in between, after the solar eclipse, the day after, Venus goes into Cancer. So by the time we get to the lunar eclipse on July 16th, July 17th, Venus is conjoining the north node of, conjoining the north node is exactly opposite Saturn. And so, Neptune in Pisces is in range of a wide trine to the total solar eclipse. But it's very closely trining the north node. It's very closely forming a sextile to the south node of the moon, as well as Saturn, and also sextiling Pluto. So Neptune in Pisces is in this role of mediating. It's sextiling, and whenever you have a planet like sextiling or trining, an opposition or a polarity, that planet's in a role of helping you facilitate and integrate and work with the intensification of what is going on in that polarity, right? So in this case, it's Neptune, but that definitely to me speaks to this idea of our beliefs, as we already mentioned, and how are our beliefs getting conditioned by the culture, by the civilization, by the Saturn-Pluto aspect, which is very much about the decay. It is a sign of feeling of impending doom relative to civilization and culture and these very bleak events occurring. And Neptune in Pisces, though, is something that's very imaginal. And it's very much about what is that imaginal vision underlying our field of perception, our ability to see the interconnections of everything, what's going on right now, as well as all the way back across time, because because we have the Saturn on the south node, Pluto on the south node, eclipse on the south node, the lunar eclipse on the south node. This is about huge, the entire orbital arcs of all of these archetypes. So it's actually a configuration that really does speak to the trajectory of civilization across time and how that impacts us as humans, especially these themes of systematic oppression that we are bearing witness to right now. So to me, the Neptune in Pisces, instead of you can get all overwhelmed by that, like kind of like you were saying, and just put your head in the sand and just be like, I can't do anything about what's going on. My life is fated. There's nothing I can do about this. And not to say that life isn't fated in some way, but just that there's the imaginable capacity to still envision something that you do want to create. And there's a element of that we do have the ability to make the intention of what we actually want to have happen. And so I think Neptune in Pisces kind of opens up that sort of larger field of also compassion for other people, being compassionate to other people that are really having a hard time right now. But I think also imagining, I think just how to face things and what to do about what's going on. Not being escapist, not just pretending stuff's not going on. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess you can't really just say that without kind of also bringing in the whole Jupiter Neptune square that is in play throughout
Right.
this
It's a
year.
Jupiter and
So it's
yeah,
like
that's
this
happening at the
eclipse
same
is
time.
sort of pulling that energy
Hmm.
in a way as well. So it is, I guess again the Jupiter beliefs versus the Neptune fantasy, and trying to align or accommodate that. And it might be having to recalibrate our ideal visions around changing beliefs or changing opinions as well. So,
Yeah, I also think one thing I've noticed is a lot of people, which certainly would go with the Saturn Pluto South Node. There's a lot of people that's the idea of working with ancestors, like people that, especially people that are familiar with like Daniel Fours and his work around
the
ancestors, seems to
ancestral
be a lot of, ancestral medicine seems to be gaining a lot of cultural momentum. And Neptune and anyone that's been doing that work, these eclipses are definitely a sort of intensification of those themes. And again, Neptune and Pisces mediating that. Neptune and Pisces can be used in that sort of work of ancestral
100%.
healing and work.
For sure. And I think, yeah, like with the whole, um, the eclipses, it's like in order to kind of enjoy the North Node in a sense, it's almost like we've got to heal or work through or process or also acknowledge what's come before us, which is something
Mm-hmm.
that, it, one of the things about the nodes, it's almost not like, just cut away or move from the south and continue to push on through the north. It is a cycle, and they're always like a pendulum swinging between each other. So sometimes I feel that when people are, pushing towards trying to achieve this one thing, or trying to move into one direction or achieve a certain goal or outcome, and there's almost sort of like, intuitively you can sense that there's an energy blockage or something. They appear to be doing all the right things, but nothing is really kind of working or progressing or moving for them. It's like the South Node and Capricorn and Saturn and Pluto and the ancestral stuff. It's almost like there's an energetic blockage, or there's something from the past that is kind of not allowing that progress to move forward. And, for centuries, human beings have kind of recognized that, who we are is our ancestors, and who we become are our descendants. And one thing that I read somewhere, and it might actually be from Daniel Forbes's work, is the best way to honor our ancestors is to love our children. And I think that is a very beautiful way to sort of encapsulate the Cancer Capricorn eclipse season. And even if you don't have children of your own, we can always nurture other people or protect other people. And sometimes it's not necessarily about the family that we are born into. It can also be the family that we choose, and showing up for them and being there for them. And often too, it's the Cancer side. The more that we can give or honor or nurture or protect, it's the more that we can kind of get. Capricorn from the more practical or materialistic way.
Yeah, and that really also speaks to the journey of Venus, I think, which, of course, just going back to Neptune, Jupiter for a second, at that time of solstice, Venus was in Gemini, right?
Yes.
Venus comes in, Venus opposes Jupiter, Venus squares Neptune, right after we get, as Neptune's literally, and also just for a moment about Neptune too, besides that it's in that role, right, on the solstice, when we went into this eclipse field, Neptune stationed literally on that day. So Neptune got very intensified. Jupiter squared it exactly at the same time, the second square of the three squares they have, which you're right, is completely about a whole harvesting as well as kind of clearing out of our belief structure. But Venus comes through and sets that off right at the eclipse. I mean, right at the solstice. And then right at the solar eclipse, Venus is at the final degree of Gemini. And Venus right now is going under the beams of the sun. So as we get this darkening of the eclipse, we have Venus also disappearing, no longer being visible, going under the beams of the sun, which is Venus is going into like her own underworld journey of things starting to clear off and burn off and be stripped away. And then the next day it goes into Cancer, and then we have Venus coming through and engaging Saturn, facing off with Saturn, conjoining the North Node, which on one hand you can definitely say like, this is like a really difficult transit for Venus, facing off with Saturn and facing off with Pluto. And Venus is already not at top strength because Venus is going to be like coming towards combustion and being kind of burned up and purified. So sort of like Venus is undergoing this really intensified healing, kind of purging, almost like sort of like vision quest. It's not like Venus just like really this really bright, strong Venus in that way. It's this Venus coming in towards the sun. But this is sort of what you were just speaking there about who do you really care about and love, and maybe stripping away some of however you've been acting or feeling like you have to act with regard to whatever is going on with just how you think you're supposed to fit your life into this cultural, civilized construction of what you're supposed to do day to day with your responsibilities and all that. When Venus goes through these underworld phases, it's really inviting us to regenerate our sense of value and our sense of who we care about. And so we can also look at, Venus coming in actually it is still, even though it's Venus being kind of regenerated, it still is Venus coming into the picture.
Totally.
Which is a more pleasant experience than it was Mars, for example. So and I think it definitely points to, like you were saying, this idea of children, of life. Who you care about. What do you really want to do for the future generations and that sort of thing.
Yeah. It also comes back to, I guess, where the eclipse and where the majority of July's action is occurring, and that is through the second decan of Cancer. And I think that's something that you wanted to talk about as well, is how, even though Venus is going through this sort of quasi purification process, and then she's also getting, facing off against, these planetary bigwigs, through Saturn, South Node, and Pluto. But at the same time, she's kind of almost in a certain way, maybe like self-sacrificing, or in order to determine, what is it that she values, what is she prepared to nurture and protect. And, as that second decade of Cancer does symbolize, is, what boundaries are you willing to erect in order to protect what you value, or what you nurture, or what you want to see grow. So these eclipses may also be, that kind of quintessential, what you choose to say no to will allow you to say yes to perhaps what's more important, or what you value, or what you want to see grow down the track as well.
Yeah, definitely. That was basically what I was thinking with that. Yeah, and that references in Austin Coppock's 36 Faces book. He calls the second decan, I think it's called a walled garden.
A walled garden.
But it's like the idea of, you have a garden and building a wall or a barrier or a boundary around whatever it is you want to cultivate or, nurture within that boundary, which is also kind of sealing things off at the same time. So, right, it's sort of like, how do we want to change that boundary in a way, and like you were just saying, like, do we need a let some more things in? Do we need to kind of shift around or renegotiate that or mediate it or change it in some way?
Agreed. Yeah. So it's kind of like, really working out, what you value, what you want, and what you're prepared to do in order to see that grow or nurture and evolve. And I guess to kind of like personalize this for people just a little bit before we wrap things up is the houses of your birth chart where July's action's taking place. So we've got the Northern Eclipse in Cancer, July 2, July 3 here in the south. Then we have the full moon eclipse, the lunar eclipse in Capricorn on July 16 and 17. And so if you're an Aries or Libra or have Aries, Libra rising, of course, that's going to play out over your 4th and 10th houses. So we're talking about themes of your professional direction, your career, and the home and family domestic stuff. So that quintessential life-work balance there, if you're Aries and Libra. Of course, if you're Taurus, this is Taurus or Scorpio, this is your 3rd, 9th house sectors. So this is to do with travel, to do with learning, to do with your, communication, to do with reading, writing, studying, and those, big kind of bucket list type of things. If you are Gemini or Sag rising, it's all about your money.
Yeah.
Ray and I both laughing because we're in the same zone there. We both have Gemini rising, so we
make that green Gemini. Make that money. I guess everybody doesn't have green money, but yeah.
Well, we've got a bit of, our money is a little bit more colourful. Where I really struggle in the US, I've actually got to get my glasses on and actually read the money rather than it just being colour-coded. So I've got all these American coins, which I'll have to go and change because it's just easier to throw a 20 than try and count out the right cash when I'm in the US. I'll eventually get used to it, no doubt. So, if you're Sag or Gemini, it is basically money, the money that you earn and, of course, the money that you might have in partnership, debts, taxes, finance, all that good stuff.
It also really, the 8th house too, there's also like, when we're talking about the ancestors and some of that really deep, the 8th house getting activated definitely brings up some other stuff too about the hidden, realm getting really activated as well, like subconscious stuff too. And
that's a very good point. Like if you feel like a blockage of energy around resources or getting more, it might be healing stuff to do from the past or what have you in order to open up that. Cancer, Capricorn, it's all about you and your relationships and significant others, and that can be your professional and personal. Leo and Aquarius, this is all happening in the more sort of private parts of your horoscope, so the 12th and the 6th. So it might be a lot to do with how you can prioritize your time management to allow a little bit more space for perhaps some spiritual quests or some spiritual work, and also travel and what have you as well. If you are a Pisces or a Virgo, then this is activating some of the more fortunate houses in the horoscope, which is the 11th and the 5th. So it's got a lot to do with your friendships, your creative outlets, your children, and the ways and means of which you find joy in your life. So the eclipses might be stirring that stuff up and perhaps getting a little bit more boundaries so you can do more of the other side. So
and that sun sign is for real. I was just thinking that sun sign horoscope because I'm a Pisces sun, but I'm Gemini rising. And like,
you just said goodbye.
When I got to that, there's so much of that going on for my Pisces sun side's really. I can really see that. I can really see that this time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that just gives you like a little bit of an insight of, planting some seeds of thought about, what houses and what life topics are potentially being stirred up this month and what you can expect out of July's astrology. So we've talked for a long time, which is just like so much what Gray and I do when we get together. We get our Gemini bits going on and we could probably continue talking, but whether you want to continue to listen is another thing. So we'll probably wrap this up a little bit now. So Gray, do you have anything that you wanted to share or talk about or promote in terms of your work up there in Washington State?
Well, you can always check out my site at Gray Crawford. It's Gray, Crawford.net. And I'm usually posting articles there. There are some talks of mine you can purchase there. And I don't really have any pending events happening really this next month. But I will say that anybody that's interested in getting a consultation with me, if you've listened to this video and want to get a consultation about what's going on in your chart right now, just when you contact me, tell me that you listened to this and I can give you like a 40% off the consultation. So I can offer that at least.
Oh, wow. That's awesome, Gray. So it's all happening. And you're also writing for astrology.com, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's something that's happened in the last, it kind of came in with the last set of eclipses, but where, yeah, I got this writing project for astrology.com, which sort of gave me a taste of your lifestyle of having to write an excessive amount of
words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of cookbook astrology that I don't normally write. But now it's with these eclipses, it's kind of shifted into, now they want me to keep going writing like little articles about the current transits. So yeah, there was one recently about Mercury going into Leo, and I'll be having one coming out soon about Venus. The thing we were talking about actually, Venus conjoining the North Node in Cancer. So yeah, that's astrology.com.
Yeah, you're a great writer, so very happy to see that you're getting your work out there a little bit more. As for me, I am actually, it's not on my website yet, but it will be. I'm doing a class on predicting with the moon, July 25 here in Australia, which I believe will be July 24 in the US. So all the details will be on the events tab very soon, hopefully. Maybe they're up there now. I'll have to check in with my assistant. But yeah, that's kind of like the main thing that I've got happening right now. Horoscopes will be posted. I write monthly horoscopes on the website. And of course, there's also the Water Trio Astrology podcast, which I do with my dear friends Alicia and Kelly. Comes out once a week. So there's that stuff too. So there's plenty out there between the both of us. So do you have any final words in respect to the eclipse?
I wish everybody safe travels through this coming eclipse vortex.
Yeah, exactly the same here. And I guess, my parting words is spend a little bit of time, prior to the eclipse and think about, what it is you really want, what it is you really value, and what hard work are you prepared to put in to make it happen. So yeah, so bye for now. Thanks for joining me, Gray. It's been great chatting with you.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
All righty. See you later. There, we did it.